Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Dr. Jefferson Netto. I'm a Bible prophecy expert, and in this series, we are studying the book of Daniel chapter by chapter. And so, in this particular video, you're going to study chapter number 2. So that means that we have at least 2 other videos already recorded. So we have an overview of the book of Daniel, and we have chapter 1 already analyzed. So if you haven't seen those, I suggest you to stop it right now and go ahead and take a look at the other 2 videos. And so that's going to help you understand what I'm going to say here on chapter 2. But if you are updated, then it's okay. Let's just keep going. Okay? All right. So continuing on chapter 2, I want to start with, of course, verse 1. I'm going to put here on the screen for you to take a look. New King James Version, chapter 2 of the book of Daniel. So Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So verse 1 says, Now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. And interesting is that would be the normal procedure, right? So you have a dream and you know that someone has the gift to interpret it. So what you do, you come, you tell the dream, and then that person that has the gift of interpretation will give you an interpretation, right? That would be the right procedure for anyone who had a dream and is looking for an interpretation. But for some reason, God closed the heart of Nebuchadnezzar. God put something in his mind that is unusual, but you're going to understand why God did that. So God also had something in mind, and that would involve Daniel and his special gift to receive prophetic revelation from the Lord. So let's keep reading so you're going to understand what I'm trying to tell you. So verse 5 says, The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made in ash heap. Look at that. Oh my God. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. Now look at that. This is something we know today that God put in Nebuchadnezzar's heart, okay? So he came from the following reasoning. First of all, he knew that his magicians and sorcerers would say anything to please him. He was a powerful man, okay? The most powerful man on this planet at the time. The man that had the power to give life, the man that had the power to take the life of whomever he pleased, okay? So we are talking about the kind of power that we don't even see nowadays. And so his idea, of course, he was very, very intelligent, very smart man. And he knew, well, if I tell them my dream, probably they're going to tell me anything. They won't say, oh, Your Highness, we don't know. I'm sorry, we don't understand this dream, and we can't give the interpretation. They would never say that. So if he told them the dream, they would have said anything. It didn't matter if they didn't know what the dream meant, but they would have said anything just to be okay with the king. And he knew them. Nebuchadnezzar knew those guys. So he said, no way. If you're really a magician, if you're really a sorcerer, okay, if you really have this gift, then you should be able to tell me what I dreamed. Okay? If you can tell me what I dreamed, that means that you're fake. You guys are fake. And if you can't tell me what I dreamed, then I'm gonna, order you guys to be killed, and I'm gonna burn your houses down. So, in other words, he would kill them. He would kill all their relatives and burn their houses down to ashes. Okay, so of course they were in big trouble because they didn't have the ability to receive that revelation, because that dream was given by God. God was at play here, guys. So if that was something that came from Satan, of course Satan could have told them. Someone in there, should have the power to communicate with Satan. I have no doubt about that. But the problem is that dream came from God, and Satan had no business in it. So the situation was very bad, and then the news just spread around, saying that Nebuchadnezzar was willing to kill all the wise men in Babylon. So this is the catch, because the order was every single wise man in Babylon will die if they don't give me an answer about my dream. And in that list were Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they were classified as wise men. They were trained. Remember, they spent 3 years in training. Okay, being trained in the language of the Chaldeans. Learning all things that they had in that palace, reading every single scroll, and everything that they could learn from that nation that could classify them as wise men. So in reality, they were all of a sudden, condemned to death because of that order of the king. Now, the passage continues showing that the situation was very bad, and then what happened is that verse 14, let me put that on the screen for you. Verse 14 says, then of course that came to the knowledge of Daniel, and then Daniel, verse 14 says, then with counsel and wisdom Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Wow, this is so powerful. This is a man that knows God. This is a man that really knows his God. Look at that. He could have said, oh, that's impossible. Go ahead and kill everybody. That's impossible. No, this is a man that knows the God that he serves. Okay? And he said, okay, can you give me some time? I'm going to pray to my God and ask him if he is willing to reveal this matter to me. So he wasn't sure that God would reveal him the dream, but he was absolutely sure that God was able to. That's the point. He had no doubt whatsoever that God was able to do so. Okay? So he asked for some time to go ahead and pray to the Lord. So verse 17 says, then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And as you know already, these guys are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And verse 18 says, that they might seek mercies from the God of heavens concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So here's the proof, the biblical proof that Daniel and his companions were also condemned to death. The decree of the king you know, involved every single person in Babylon that was classified as wise men. So, and of course, that God had a plan with this, because I don't know, perhaps if Daniel and his companions weren't included in this classification, and therefore, as victims of that decree, so probably, I don't know, probably Daniel wouldn't feel, led to ask for the concerning time to pray God and give an answer to the king. I don't know. I can say it. I can, affirm it, but this is plausible. So let's keep going. Um, Verse 20 says, Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. Verse 22 says, He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand. Now look at that. This is amazing. Now Daniel is praying, is thanking God. This is a prayer of gratitude. He has already received the revelation from God. God gave Daniel exactly the same dream that he had given to Nebuchadnezzar. And now Daniel was fine, was okay, because he understood that the Lord had, blessed them with that revelation. He was ready to go into the king's presence to reveal the dream as the king requested. So from verse 24 on, we're going to have Daniel telling the king that he knows the revelation, not because he's better than the others, but because God had mercy on him and gave him the revelation and the understanding, so he could make it known to the king, the interpretation of that dream. So I'm going to move to verse 32, verse 31, when Daniel starts giving the king the understanding, or telling him the dream. And verse 31 says, You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image, this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold was crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So this is just Daniel, telling the king how the dream was. Now look at that. How impressive is when one receives a revelation from God Himself. Okay, so if Daniel had told the king anything that wasn't a match, what do you think that would happen? With a man as powerful as Nebuchadnezzar was at the time. So the king listened very quietly. That means that Daniel was telling the king exactly what was in his mind as a memory of his dream. So God gave Daniel exactly the same dream in all the details necessary to convince the king that indeed Daniel received a revelation from his God. So remember that this is the beginning of the book of Daniel. So before that, we just have chapter 1. And in chapter 1, there is no relationship between Daniel and Daniel, his companions, and the king. So they were presented to the king as wise men, that they were being trained in all matters of Babylon and everything, but there was no relationship whatsoever. So in other words, the king didn't know Daniel. He didn't know the abilities that Daniel had and his friends. He knew nothing. Okay, so all of a sudden comes that guy, a captive from Judah, from Jerusalem, and that guy comes. And remember that when he was presented to the king, he was considered 10 times wiser than all the wise men in Babylon. Now comes this guy, and the king finds out that his first impression of Daniel was like absolutely right. He wasn't only 10 times wiser than all the others, but he had a better relationship with his God than all the sorcerers and magicians had with their gods. They had many gods, they worshiped many gods, but Daniel had one single God. And his relationship with that one single God was much deeper and better than the relationship that all the sorcerers had with their gods. So, can you imagine, how puzzled Nebuchadnezzar was? Can you understand? Are you following me? Can you understand what was happening in the mind of that powerful man as he saw that captive guy, that Jewish guy, standing in front of him and telling him word by word the dream that he had in his bed, everything that he saw in his night visions. Now that single man was standing in front of him and telling him everything word by word. I think that this by itself is already a let's say, an amazing proof of how amazing God is. And I hope you following me when I try to bring you not only the understanding of what the passage says, but also what's behind that passage when we see the nature of God being revealed to a hidden man, just because he was in such position of authority, and God knew that he had the power to influence his people. He had already influenced Jerusalem. Jerusalem was under his authority right now, his dominion. And a few years ahead, he would destroy Jerusalem completely. So God was using that man as an instrument to fulfill his purposes. And right now, he was having the first real experience with God. So until that point, he was, familiar with all the rituals that he had to follow to please, his gods. But right now, he was having a real, powerful experience with the God of Israel, and that is powerful by itself. So let's see how that played out, so we can understand, the purposes of God. So on verse 36, now we have Daniel moving to the interpretation of the dream, and he says, "This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it, before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. So we stop right here. Look at that. Daniel knew that Nebuchadnezzar served other gods. Okay? He was the kind of man that he had the obligation, to perform, different kinds of ritual to please the gods of Babylon. So, but Daniel ignores 100% what Nebuchadnezzar believes. He ignores. He comes and says, listen, I know who gave you that dream. That dream was given by God himself, the God of heaven. He ignores 100% all the false gods that Nebuchadnezzar worshipped at that time. And this is, guys, this is amazing. Let me tell you why. Sometimes we don't know how to evangelize. We don't know how to stand before a wicked world, and we don't know how, for example, how to evangelize people who worship other false gods. And because normally what we try to do is to demise what they believe. We want to bring down their faith and talk against the gods that they trust in and things like that. And honestly, for me, this is a sign of weakness. When we try, first of all, to demise what other people believe in order to establish what we believe, this is a sign of weakness. Because when we know our God as Daniel knew, we should behave as Daniel behaved. Do you see anywhere in this passage, Daniel coming and said, oh, you know what? Forget about your gods. That's not your God. That's not Marduk. That's not that God. This is not the other God. This is my God. Daniel just ignores 100% what the king believes, and his expectations about what Daniel would say. He didn't care. He just speaks with the full conscience that everything comes from God and God alone. So look at this. Verse 37, you, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heavens has given you, not your gods, but the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And verse 38 says, and wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hands. Look at that. And has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. And here he starts, how can I say this strongly enough? Here, you are watching the beginning of a wonderful, a tremendous process of revelation from God. Because what is happening here is that God is using Daniel to lay down a singular foundation to understand eschatology as we know it today. Okay? Let me give you this example. We have, before Daniel, we have prophecies from, I'd say, from Moses. Back there, we have prophecies from even from David, even from the psalmists. We have prophecies in the Bible, but more strongly, we have prophecies from Isaiah before Daniel, and we have prophecies from Jeremiah before Daniel. And we have contemporary of Daniel, we have tremendous, powerful prophecies of the book of Ezekiel. And we have some other prophecies, for example, of in the minor prophets, some of them before Daniel and some of them after Daniel. Okay, now we see that Daniel is moving into a process that we haven't seen in other books. Okay, so for example, if you read the book of Isaiah, is one of the most powerful prophetic books in the Bible. Okay, but what you're going to see are prophecies scattered here and there, because you need to understand that even though you have a book in your hand today from these guys that you can read it beginning, from beginning to end, you need to understand that those prophecies were given to those prophets, throughout, their whole lives. We're talking about here sometimes 20, 30, 40 years prophesying. And, throughout the whole process, they had, let's say 40 prophecies. And they wrote them down. And now we have everything written in a book. But what we have are prophecies scattered. Some of them, have already been fulfilled regarding, the nation of Israel and some other nations in the world of that time. But some prophecies are yet to be fulfilled. But you have to gather them. You have to make a map to understand, which is which. Okay? Now, the book of Daniel is different because the book of Daniel is organized systematically to help us understand what is the process that God chose to reveal his sovereignty on this planet. So on chapter 2, we have this foundation being laid down so we can later on come back to this chapter to understand, for example, what is happening on chapter 7, on chapter 8, for example, on chapter 9 and chapter 11. Okay, so if we didn't have this revelation on chapter 2 that God gave to Nebuchadnezzar, first of all, later on he gave to Daniel, and then gave the interpretation to Daniel, if we didn't have this chapter, we would be in trouble, for example, when we get to chapter 7. How can we understand chapter 7 if we didn't have this foundation laid down on chapter 2 of the book of Daniel? So it's the system, the prophetic system that Daniel brings that is different from all the other prophets. So we need the book of Daniel to understand Revelation. And we even need the book of Daniel to understand some prophecies that are prior to Daniel, like Jeremiah and Isaiah, for example. I hope you're following me, because this is so amazingly important to really understand this book and to understand things that comes later on, and even to understand this other amazing book in the Bible, which is the book of Revelation, which many people run from it because they can't understand it. They open the book of Revelation, they see so much weird things happening that they just run from this book. They just don't open the book. Let's read something else. But the problem is that it's because if you can't understand the book of Daniel well enough, of course you're going to have trouble understanding the book of Revelation. Okay? So he says clearly that the head of gold is Babylon in Nebuchadnezzar. Of course, they are together in this. So verse 39, he says, "But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." So in his interpretation, he says two things that I feel important to mention. First of all, he clearly says that the kingdom that would come after Babylon was inferior. Okay? And of course, he's referring to Median Persia, which is Iran today. Okay? Iran is Persia. Okay? Media has disappeared, but Iran is still there. That's Persia. Okay, so he's saying, okay, there is a kingdom that is inferior to yours, but he's coming after you and he's gonna defeat this nation. And that is weird by itself. How is it possible that a kingdom that is inferior will come and defeat that one that is superior? But that's the point. That's the magnitude of God. That's the greatness of our God. He has the power over the nations. And he would never let a nation or a kingdom to endure forever. That's the point. That's the point of the message. So when you get to the feet of iron and clay and the stone that destroys the statue, you understand the point that God is making. God is saying, listen, it doesn't matter how much I give you. It doesn't matter how big you become. It doesn't matter how much you conquer. I will never let you be forever. Only my kingdom will be forever. Okay, so we have this example from these powerful kingdoms in the past that could be an example for America, that could be an example for Russia, that could be an example for China, and all, those nations that think they are powerful enough to stay there forever. So here's the message of God. He won't stay there forever. It doesn't matter how powerful you think you are. Your end will come, because only God's kingdom will endure forever. Only God's kingdom. And I mean it. And I leave this word here as a prophetic word. So, perhaps America will wake up. Perhaps, government will wake up. And as we see today, for example, I know that when we talk about politics, it's a minefield, sometimes it's better not talk about it. But we see, for example, right now, the situation of this country, how the leftists are working, overtime, trying to demise Donald Trump's government, just because he's trying to restore back some of our principles, principles that made us great. This nation is not the greatest nation, in the world by chance. This is not an accident. Why are people trying to destroy the principles that made us great? Why? Of course that there is an intention of the devil here, because the devil knows that, as this nation recognizes that God is the one who made it great, it will remain great for as long as possible. But when we open the doors for sin, for homosexuality, for abortion, and for all that, trash that, the leftists are trying to impose on us, we better watch out, because God's judgment is coming and the price will be huge. Okay? So the book of Daniel is an excellent platform to preach on this and to show people the reality that God is indeed the only king that endures forever. Okay, so keep going here, verse 40, and then he talks about the Persia, and in the same verse he talks about Greece, the Greek Empire, and the third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And he's mentioning here, of course, the Greek Empire and Alexander the Great that came after Persia and really, really indeed, ruled over all the earth, one of the most powerful kingdom in human history. So verse 40 says, and the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. That's the Roman Empire. Inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break. Look at that. This is amazing. That kingdom will break. That kingdom will break in pieces. Look at that. Will break in pieces and crush all the others. That's the Roman Empire. And verse 41 says, and whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it. Just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Wow. As you saw iron mix with the ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And verse 44, probably one of the most important, is, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to another people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So just to help you understand, so the Bible speaks by itself, okay? So the passage is clear enough. But I just want to give you a quick understanding, as you can see here in this list, how Daniel received by revelation everything that would happen from Babylon up to the end of the world, because there are things here that are said clearly, but there are some others that are hidden, are coded. So we would need the book of Revelation later on and things that Jesus said, so then we would understand exactly what Daniel was saying. So first of all, he mentions Babylon as being the head of gold. He mentions Persia being the next kingdom, okay, the chest of silver. And he mentions the Greek Empire being the bronze, represented by the loins of bronze. And then he mentions the Roman Empire being the legs of iron. And by the way, two legs, and the Roman Empire were divided into two, segments, east and west. And I can explain that later on, but so you can understand what's happening. Now, here comes a point that I think that is important to tell you about, okay? So the majority of people who read the book of Daniel chapter 2, when they come to this point, the 10 toes made out of iron and clay. So basically what they say is that this is the final kingdom of the Antichrist that would come, at the end of age to bring up the Antichrist. So here I see it differently. Let me tell you why. Because we have 10 toes on chapter 2, we have 10 horns on chapter 7, and we have 10 horns on Revelation chapter 13. Now, we tend to think that the 10 toes and the 10 horns of Daniel 7, the 10 toes of chapter 2, the 10 horns of chapter 7, and the 10 horns of Revelation 13 are exactly the same thing. But I'm going to show you, as we advance studying this book, I'm going to show you that the 10 horns of Revelation 13 are different from the 10 horns of Daniel 7 and from the 10 toes of Daniel 2. Okay? We are going to identify, we can't rush here, okay? We have to go chapter by chapter, but when we reach chapter 7, I'm going to show you in the text that the 10 horns of that chapter are not the same 10 horns of Revelation chapter 13, okay? But I understand that the 10 toes are the same 10 horns of chapter 7. They are different from Revelation 13, but they are the same. The 10 toes and the 10 horns of chapter 7 are the same. And in my opinion, they are pointing to the fragmentation of the Roman Empire. Okay? Different from the 10 horns of Revelation 13, which shows to the 10 empires at the end time that will join forces and give their power to the Antichrist. That is for sure. Revelation chapter 13. But when you compare the animal of Daniel 7 and the animal of Revelation 13, you see that they are not the same animal. They do not represent the same time in history, and they don't represent the same animal or the same kind of empire or beast. Okay? But I'm going to show you as we move to that chapter later on. But right now, what I can tell you is these 10 toes are definitely the same 10 horns of chapter 7. And they represent the fragmentation of the Roman Empire. Because the two legs of the statue, they represent Rome. And that means that God was showing already this division of the empire between east and west that happened, after Constantine on the 4th century. And later on, so 476, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm trying to bring up my memory, 476, the kingdom is split in two. So one remained in Italy, Rome, and another part, moved its headquarters to today Turkey, Constantinople, today Istanbul, Turkey. And we're going to talk about that later on also, okay? So that means that God was talking about the Roman Empire, even about its division. So when the iron comes to the toes, of course, that the Bible was talking about the fragmentation of the empire. Because I don't know if you know how the Roman Empire, came to a conclusion. So from 476 on, when Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople, today Istanbul, what happened is that the kingdom started to decline, gradually. And from the 5th century up to the 15th century, Rome started to disintegrate, to fragment. And every time that he lost dominion of an area of the empire, a new independent tribe rose up. And that's the secret. So the Bible was already foretelling what would happen when that iron empire, declined. That's the point. So the 10 toes are the declination, the fragmentation of the Roman Empire. And I'm going to tell you later on why that is important, because that is related to the birth of Islam. But I'm going to tell you later on when we get to chapter 7. Okay? All right, so this is the interpretation. And of course, from chapter 46 on, what happened is that Nebuchadnezzar promotes Daniel. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face. Oh my God. Whoo! Prostrate before Daniel. Can you imagine that? Are you able to fathom such a thing? A powerful king. Can you imagine? I'm going to give you a very poor example. Can you imagine, like, King Jong-un, North Korea's ruler, all of a sudden bowing down to anyone, amazed with something, with a revelation, with the manifestation of the power of God? Can you imagine something like that happening? So this is what is happening here. Exactly the same thing. So the king, this is amazing. I'm very excited. So King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." 48 says, "Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Come on, come on. That's the right place to shout and to praise the Lord and to give him all the honor, all the glory, all the worship, all the praises. This is the God that we're talking about. You see why studying prophecies is so exciting. When you read something like that and you see that God is able to turn the mind of a powerful man like Nebuchadnezzar, even though he was a heathen man, but even though God brings his heart close to him and shows to him, look at this, I am the real ruler of the universe. And you can only prosper if you follow my direction. And now I see this picture of that powerful man bowing down before Daniel, prostrated before a captive of Judah. And I can imagine, those rulers, actually sorcerers, magicians, army officials, all those people, witnessing the mighty, powerful Nebuchadnezzar coming down his mighty throne and prostrating before a captive man, before a Jew. Oh my God, this is amazing. So what I see here is God, God was making a point. That's God saying, listen, I allowed you to bring my people here captive, but don't forget who is ruling here. Okay, I am the one sitting on a throne here. I am the one ruling the universe. Never forget that, Nebuchadnezzar. And God made that statement on chapter 2. And you're going to see another statement that God makes on chapter 4. When Nebuchadnezzar forgets all these things and decided to play crazy and to show his pride. And then God comes down and shows him again who is ruling. So that's chapter 2. I hope that blessed you. And so next video, we are going to study and analyze chapter number 3 of Daniel. Thank you very much. May God bless you powerfully in the name of Jesus. Amen.